It's a tough argument to make, which is you got to sort of take some medicine for a while before the goal of what these tariffs are, which is to return some manufacturing back to the United States. It's going to take a while. And the question is whether you can get enough patience from the public to put this off, and whether the theory is right. Can you really motivate certain industries that have decided to manufacture outside the United States to come back? Is there enough incentive to do that? I think we're all about to find out. Donald Trump sort of flippantly said, well, maybe kids for Christmas are going to have to go with fewer toys, and the dolls might cost a little bit much because of the poor implementation by this administration, the haphazard way that they've been dealing with the tariffs, and the fact that I think the signal has been sent, everything's kind of negotiable. And if that's the case, then when does a company decide, okay, I'm finally going to bring everything here? But I do think politically, this White House has done a terrible job communicating the tariffs in general, a terrible job sort of preparing the country, preparing business for this. In an alternative universe, perhaps in a more transparent and methodical way that you try to implement something like this, there may have been more political support. Look, I've certainly given this Trump White House a hard time. I think it's been a terrible 100 days for them politically. And a lot of Americans seem to agree that that's the case. I think that this White House has another huge problem and blind spot, and that is they only know how to communicate with their base, and they only seem interested in communicating with their base. Own the libs still seems to be the mindset. Worrying about catering to the base and making them happy. I could argue that this firing of Mike Waltz in some ways is more of a response to the base than it is anything else. I guess he hasn't been fired. I should correct myself. He just was simply moved to another position, which you got to, whatever you think of Donald Trump, is at least he's showing some loyalty to Mike Waltz, meaning here you got this guy to quit his seat in Congress. The guy who replaced him was literally sworn in 3 weeks ago, and now he could have been completely out of a job. Ambassador to the United Nations is not such a bad consolation prize. It's no national security advisor. It's arguably the second most powerful job in a West Wing after the chief of staff. It's certainly the second best office. But their lack of interest in trying to communicate with skeptics, not critics on the left. If they don't want to communicate with their pure critics, that's a White House's prerogative. But if you're actually trying to make a political argument and win a political argument, you've actually got to try to communicate to skeptics. Whether it's people like, I think the folks that are listening to this podcast who may be skeptic of this tariff regime, but, really not happy with how it's been rolled out. It's been sloppy. At least make your case in a more logical way and try to talk to this crowd. And I don't think they've done a very good job of that. And that's the question I have. Are they even interested in it? The Trump 1.0, their communication shop seemed to be interested, and Donald Trump did it in his first term, trying to communicate with everybody. In fact, I think the great strength of Donald Trump's candidacy in 2016 versus the other campaigns was that he was sort of agnostic when it came to the media. Sure, he had opinions of who he thought was good to him and not, but he was willing to talk to anybody. I guess we're seeing a little bit of that in his decision to say yes to the Atlantic. And that is a reminder. If you can get directly to the president, he'll give you time, even if he doesn't like your outlet, because he's got that much confidence in himself, right? He believes nobody can get the best of him. He believes he can survive in an interview. And as long as he's getting a chance to talk, he's okay with it. I wonder, the question I have is he surrounded by a press staff that wants him to do that? Or is he surrounded by a press staff that is going to try to prevent him or block him from dealing with journalists that are neither anti-Trumpers or pro-Trumpers, but are essentially professional skeptics? And I've always said that that's what I believed believe my job has been when it comes to covering policy, which is okay. Show your work. Be a skeptic about it. Be intrigued about it. Cover it. Kick the tires. Do all those things. But as a journalist, if you behave as a professional skeptic, then you're more likely to get more information, and I think deliver a better report for the average American on this. But I do think the big, they've got to figure out how to communicate beyond their base, because right now it's not working for them politically. It may make them feel good, right? And if that's all the world that they live in, that's nice, but then they're going to get a shock to the system, as they already have been when they start holding elections. The way the president handled the Waltz situation is interesting, and I think the question's going to be, what should we take away from this, right? It wasn't a total like get out of here mindset. Poor old Reince Priebus was fired by tweet, and was essentially abandoned after Air Force One landed at Andrews. Now, I don't think that's the way he felt at the end of the day, but it certainly looked that way, and that certainly seemed to be a look that the president back then didn't seem to mind. The fact that he gave Waltz a sort of a consolation prize, I think shows that he would like to have some loyalty, and it's probably smarter, right? If you don't do that, who knows who Waltz may talk to. When you ask Pete Hegseth what it's like when you fire former staffers and what happens when they start talking to the press. So I am intrigued by the decision that they have, and they had this extra job that they hadn't filled because of the narrow House majority and the decision to pull back the nomination, which of course UN ambassador was originally supposed to go to Elise Stefanik. But what's interesting, and as my one of my producers, Lauren Gardner, put it to me, says, I hope you can keep track of all of Marco Rubio's titles right now. He is the Senate confirmed Secretary of State, but he's also the acting administrator of the USAID. He's also the acting archivist, and now he's also the National Security Advisor. Now, a lot of people are making Kissinger comparisons because the last person to hold both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor was Henry Kissinger to Richard Nixon. And that'll be an interesting question, whether Rubio keeps this for a while or whether the president decides to reward Witkoff, his sort of personal negotiator from around the world, his special envoy for everything, right? It wasn't just one thing. He sent him to Putin, he sent him to Iran, he sent him to Israel. So I think right now Witkoff is sort of his personal envoy. I can tell you from my understanding is that Marco Rubio really has earned a lot of trust of Donald Trump. When you start to look at why was Waltz sort of pushed out? Was he pushed out because of the Jeffrey Goldberg signal incident? Or was he pushed out because MAGA never trusted him anyway, because he was a well-known sort of conventional or traditional national security Republican? What do I mean by that? Somebody pre-Trump, right? Where the Republican establishment was pre-Trump. Now, Marco Rubio is somebody that I think a lot of people, including myself, would have put him in that track. Even the way he ran the Intel committee with Mark Warner, when one would be chair, one vice chair, depending on which party was in charge, seemed to also indicate that he really was sort of more on the conventional side of American foreign policy, which I would say center left and center right, both share that philosophy. But as people have told me who are close to this situation, that the more time that Trump has spent with Rubio, and Rubio had proximity going for him, right? Obviously, we know this was a nasty primary fight in 2016, and there was no love lost between Marco Rubio, little Marco, and Donald Trump, and the hands comment and all that business. But that over the 4 years, Rubio worked really hard to regain Trump's trust. Now, for some of you, that might be a huge turnoff. Some of you might think he's just being a hypocrite. And you know what? None of us know the motive for sure. But he became Secretary of State not because Donald Trump thought he owed the establishment wing of the party somebody to give a place to. He gave it to him because over time, he started leaning on Rubio when it certainly came to do with anything having to do with policy, foreign policy in Latin America. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't make any decision on Venezuela without running it by Rubio, and it was the case towards the end of his first term. So I won't be surprised if this relationship of National Security Advisor and Secretary of State is something that lasts a good 6 to 9 months, which in a Trump White House would be a long time. Remember, he went through 4 national security advisors in his first term. He went through 4 chiefs of staff in his first term. So you're looking at about, every 9 to 12 months, some sort of shift or change here. What's interesting about all the titles that Marco Rubio has is that it also gives Donald Trump flexibility. So we now see what he was willing to do with Waltz. Well, I don't want to totally kick him out of the administration because you never know if you create an enemy. Well, let's say he finally comes to the conclusion that Hegseth just can't manage the Pentagon. Well, now there's 3 titles he essentially can take away. Hegseth is Senate confirmed. And so if you want to make him the national security advisor, he could. I don't know if Trump wants Hegseth around that much, but maybe he gives Hegseth the administrator of AID. Maybe he hands him the archivist role. Maybe he gives him an ambassadorship. But I wonder if this is going to be the new pattern of Trump, where he finds a place when he decides someone isn't working in a position, rather than create an eventual source against his administration, which they're very paranoid about leaks, that instead you find a place within the administration, you keep this person in the tent.